So sorry that you've got me back on the screen here again, but Zoshia Fraser um, is with New Brunswick Soil and Crop Improvement Association, and they are kind of they are the New Brunswick member of CFGA. So they participate in our pilot project, and she was hoping to be with us today, but she is the assistant general manager to the New Brunswick Soil and Crop, and they've got their AGM today, so she's not able to join us. But she put together this slide deck and asked if I could share it with you. So I'll get down to it. So why the Tantramar? So we've got 6 community pastures here in New Brunswick, and the Tantramar community pasture is by far the largest, and it runs about 1,800 acres. And so we understood right from the start that it wasn't eligible for an easement. And we knew right off the hop, or not right off the hop, I guess, as the avoided conversion of grasslands protocol came to light, we knew that easements would be required in order to generate offsets. So we knew that this site wasn't necessarily eligible. However, it did offer a great opportunity to reach a large number of producers with one project. So if you've ever been to the Maritimes, the Tantramar pasture is just outside of Sackville, and Sackville is right across the marsh from Amherst. And so that little sliver of land that connects Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, where all the grasslands are down and through there, where the Acadians first built the dikes to push back the ocean. The Bay of Fundy's in there. It's a beautiful place. Some of you visited there when we had our annual meeting in Moncton down at the Nepan Research Station. So that's where you're going to find Dr. Joseph Papadopoulos and John Dinesveld work that they're doing there on grassland management with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. This is all within that catchment. And so we saw this as a great chance to really lay down some roots in a large kind of BMP project that would allow us to look at both carbon, good grazing management, but also it's a very active wildlife area. So there's a lot of activity from Nature NB and Ducks Unlimited Canada and Nature Conservancy of Canada. So this was a chance for us to demonstrate how good grazing management impacted soil carbon as well as biodiversity and habitat maintenance. It is within the Chignecto Isthmus, which has been identified as a community-supported priority place through the Nature Fund program at Environment Climate Change Canada. So again, a good opportunity to link both agricultural and ECCC priorities into one project. And because it's within earshot really of the Nepan Research Station, and they're doing a lot of good work supported by BCRC and others on grazing management and soil carbon accumulation under good grazing. We saw that as a linkage to take this 1,800 acre kind of commercial scale grazing management demonstration and link it very closely with the work happening at Nepan. So it was the perfect spot from our perspective. I should say, I do some work with New Brunswick cattle producers as well, and so there was an active engagement, both the New Brunswick Soil and Crop and the New Brunswick cattle producers, and Matt Beal, who was the manager of the community pasture, to see this project through. So what you're seeing here is a kind of a grazing, a paddock design that we laid out. See my cursor. There's a barn, there's a corral system kind of right here, but right next to paddock number 3. Each of these paddocks are roughly between 135 and 150 acres. So we knew, we designed this as a multi-year project to advance the infrastructure as we could. So we took some of the AGGP dollars for establishing the pilot site. We matched that with some provincial dollars for demonstration on the landscape. We got a bunch of volunteer labor from myself and others. And we got a summer student, Cameron Carlisle, that worked with us last summer to help do a lot of the installation. And then Ducks Unlimited Canada helped us with some water systems. So kind of all hands on deck to put these paddocks in. you see number 7, I guess you've got 6 paddocks here, and they were designed for 1 week. And we understand, we know that 7 days would be absolute maximum, probably a little bit more than maximum where we really want to be for grazing duration. But 6 paddocks at 7 days gives us 42 days of rest. And so the whole idea, you see this line down along the bottom here. This is the alleyway to bring them into the corral. So that allows us to manage the animals through the paddocks and then bring them back again to get started. Number 7, this is an exceptionally wet part of the pasture way up north. There's actually there's a lake here. This is a dike, and this is a Ducks Unlimited pond, and then there's another kind of very wet area up in here. So number 7 was really designed as kind of August grazing. So we would get twice through on paddocks 1 through 6, and then once it dried out, we would have that stockpile grazing in 7. That would allow us to give significant rest and then come back to number 1 in September again. So that's kind of how the design was laid out. So we went to work. You see Matt there on the left with the Lemkin hat, where does work with Lemkin in his day job and volunteers as the pasture manager. So, and Cameron is in the background there. So setting in some H braces. We went down and spent 2 days on the pasture and built some big rugged H braces and started to pull some wire, pounded some post, and then Cameron worked for a number of weeks installing insulators. So cross fencing was our number 1 goal. And water systems, when we took a look at it, traditionally in this area, it's a very wet part of the landscape. So we quite often, there's ditches and dales out there. This is dike land, reclaimed marsh flat. So it has been reclaimed with dikes. And so all the ditches and dales are usually filled full of water. So water is not a challenge. So when we designed our layout, we didn't worry about the water. But of course, once we got our cross fences in and we rolled through 2020, we realized we were in a pretty severe drought condition. And folks that have been on the maintaining this community pasture for a lot of years all said the same thing. We've never seen it this dry. We've never had a challenge with water on our livestock. Of course, it has to happen the year that we set up our cross fences. But that was okay because it highlighted some of the very important nuances that we understand go along with setting up a grazing system. That is access to water, something that we took for granted, and we had to make some mid-course corrections. So what ended up happening is because we set up our cross fences across water holes that were existing. But what happened was there was so little water and the animals were creating such impact on these dugouts that they went downhill in a hurry. So we were short on water. Quantity and quality went downhill very quickly. We ended up pumping water out of the local river into some makeshift water troughs. And in the end, we found that the very northern part of the pasture up in here, where I talked about being very, very wet, well, it was navigable and there was still water up in this area. So what we ended up doing is opening our access fences here and here, and the animals ended up meandering their way up. And so it was essentially a continuous grazing system. But in the end, the fencing infrastructure we were able to put in did allow us to move the animals around, not so much for using the grass resource, but directing them to the water resource. So again, hats off to the entire crew for being flexible and making this thing work. So some of the challenges we face, you can see some really nice grass out there, but we found that because the cattle all came in at once, the rotational grazing infrastructure wasn't up when they arrived, and we kind of built it out ahead of them. We didn't get a good chance to do the training that we know is important for training cows how to interact with a fence. Also, because this is a community pasture, and I think there's like 13 or 15 consigners, right? So we had these groups of 30, 40, maybe 50 cows coming together. We found that those social those social groups remained intact, especially as we opened up gates and groups were allowed to find their own way to water. They actually reconsolidated into their individual herd mate groups, and they would make their way across the landscape, which created additional challenges, but it was interesting to watch, and it was an enjoyable challenge because the folks that were involved in this were really good people, and we had a lot of fun learning how to work together and how to work with these animals. The other challenge, I guess, is alleyway construction. In the lower part of the infrastructure, the alleyway is really well defined, but the upper part of the pasture, not so much. So that's kind of the next step, is to understand or to design how we make that alleyway work, because some of the old infrastructure isn't really lined up within this principle. So we're going to have to make some corrections there as well. So the last challenge, I guess, is accessing, kind of the land classification index, and then deploying the protocol as per the other part of the deliverables for the project. So just a little bit on data, what we did find. So we worked with Dr. David Burton from Dalhousie University. He had another agriculture greenhouse gases project on the go to look at soil health. And so they were really, really interested to look at this long-term grassland ecosystem and kind of what we were looking at for soil health there compared to maybe some annual crop type acres. So you can see here we sampled 2 paddocks. No, don't do that. Oh, sorry guys. We sampled
Cedric.
2. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Perfect. Nope, you're doing exactly what I was going to remind you to do.
Right. So we sampled 2 paddocks in 19 and 20, and you can see, some pretty significant differences here in total carbon, total active carbon, total nitrogen, and aggregate stability, owing to, what we'd like to owe to is that we put in the rotational grazing infrastructure. We got that animal impact we were looking for by focusing hoof impact within those paddocks. If you look at the sand, silt, and clay, I think that tells a different story, because the difference, what we're finding here is the importance of focus sampling. Because to me, in 19, paddock number 1 had 23% sand, but in 2020 it only had 7.8, right? So a lot more clay, right, in year 2. So that tells me that the differences we're seeing in carbon and nitrogen stability are probably more of a function of the textural class that we're getting into, which again, important for us to be sampling very diligently and very focused, so that these kind of results don't pop up as the answers when we know that it's probably variability within the sampling between sites and between years. But you guys know that anyway. So the outcome of the protocol, this is last slide, and then I'll leave you to it. Years 1 to 10, you can see we've got it broken down into 10-year increments. So annual credit generation on tons, low would be 206 as an average annual credit generation, and the high would be 912. And I think John is on with us today. So I didn't know, Jonathan, if we looked at the entire 1,800 acres of the pasture to come up with these numbers, or if it was more about kind of the 1,000 or 1,200 acres that we actually have within our active management zone. But maybe you can pop that in the comments if you could. But this is ultimately kind of the output of what we found when we ran this Tantramar community pasture through its paces and apply the protocol. So, what's that worth? That's quite a range, between 200 and 900 per year on 1,000 acres, call it. So that's why we're looking forward to running, our pilot project to really drill down into some of these factors and make sure that we're getting some really good estimates. Last slide, hats off to Matt Beal, who is the community pasture manager there, and he is 100% volunteer. His dad gives him a hand, but it's hard to find dedication beyond a guy like Matt, who's out there managing, some 400 head on this community pasture, and doesn't take anything back from it. His own cattle aren't even out on the pasture, so he does it purely out of a love to see this thing survive and thrive and develop, and that's why he has been such an active participant here. Zoshia Fraser from New Brunswick Soil and Crop. Cameron Trenholm was with us as a summer student through the cattle producers, and Cameron, she's got an agricultural background, and but again, a lot of respect for Cameron for going out with an East Ring hammer and insulators in her backpack and a bucket full of nails, and she put all those insulators on all that smooth wire all the way across, and she monitored those cattle and monitored the water holes, all on foot. So just a tremendous bit of dedication there, and hope to have her back for the summer. Adam Campbell from Ducks Unlimited. I guess I didn't mention this, didn't have any pictures, but Ducks went out and put a couple constructed wetlands in out on this pasture that intersect our cross fences, so we're not going to have to worry in the years to come about that water availability. So hats off to those guys. John helped out with Zoshia to get the assessment done, and then I was out there with my bike and my truck and lending a hand where I could on doing some training on fencing as well. So then the rest of the volunteers that were out with us as we pounded post and strung wire to get this project done. So that's it for me.